I'm Joe Butwin. I teach in the English department and have done for a long, long time. And I also teach in Jewish studies. And what I feel to be the genuine charm of the Stroum lectureship is conversation, talk. And I think that it's also true, and we're learning more so in Susan Handelman's lectures, how important conversation, talk, face-to-face, is to Jewish tradition. We know it also from Marty Jaffe's great study of the Oral Talmud. I think that a scholar like Susan Handelman speaking to us here rekindles in us our admiration for face-to-face learning, for a kind of conversation which is both her topic, but also her personal charm and style. Susan, where are you? Talk. Shana Sara. Her Jewish name.
Thank you. Hey, welcome back to those who were here all the other times and to those who were here for the first time. The title of the overall series was Aseh lecha rav ukaneh lecha chaver. It's good to have a little Hebrew. Find yourself a teacher. But I explained that lasot also means to make in Hebrew. Make for yourself a teacher. Ukaneh lecha chaver, and acquire a friend, is the second part of that line from Pirkei Avot, from the sayings of the fathers, that we actually study in this period of time in the year. And I promised the first night, remember if you were here, that tonight I would talk about the second part, acquire a friend. And what does that have to do with finding a teacher? What's the relationship of friendship and teaching and the student-teacher relationship? A week ago, we had the model of Rebbe Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. Remember who was the, now I think I can ask quiz now already, you've been here twice. Rebbe Eliezer was the, remember, he was the plastered cistern who held everything, who never said anything he didn't hear from his teacher. He was like the CD-ROM of that time before books. And he was not the one who had the reciprocal relationship that we looked at last time, remember, with Rabbi Akiva. And what we did last time was we unpacked the whole metaphor of Rabbi Akiva saying to his student when he was in jail, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai came to him, and Rabbi Akiva was in jail for teaching, and the Rashbi said, "Teach me Torah," even though they were risking their lives. And he said, "I can't." And he said, "But teach me." And remember what Rabbi Akiva said, more than the calf wants to suckle, the cow wants to nurse. And what we did was we unpacked that whole nurturing, nurturing, feminine metaphor of a reciprocal and intimate and erotic in the kind of non-sexual sense relationship. What does it mean to nurse? It's a different model of teaching. We had the hierarchical model, then we had the reciprocal model, and we talked about Rabbi Akiva and how he's always associated with love in many ways. And now tonight, what are we going to look at? What happened to the other students of Rabbi Akiva? It's also, you see, we went in the tradition. We went Rabbi Eliezer, his great student Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Now we're looking at the other students. And that's why you have on the front, you have that chart again, the time of Rabbi Akiva and the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt, which was devastating. He supported it, by the way. Rabbi Akiva was on the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt, which was devastating. He supported it, by the way. Rabbi Akiva was a supporter of that revolt against the Romans and paid dearly, as you'll see tonight. And as I mentioned, let's just get in our mind, that was a terribly catastrophic time. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed in that failed revolt, and the country was decimated, and it took a long time for there to be recovery. And I talked a little bit about that Wednesday. So here we are back in that time, and let's look at what happens to Rabbi Akiva and his students during that time a little bit more. But first, I want to start with a beautiful commentary. There's a book called Avot de Rabbi Natan, which is a commentary on Pirkei Avot. And on this phrase, acquire a friend, which is not an easy thing to do. We're going to talk about friendship and what it means today. It says, what does that mean? It says this teaches that a person should acquire a companion and a friend. Eat with him. No, eating has been orality. We've had that all the way along. Eat with him. Drink with him. Study scripture with him. Note that came third. Eating. We should have food here, actually, for all these lectures. Embody these texts. Drink with him. Study scripture with him. Study Mishnah with him. Sleep with him. This is meant in an innocent way. And reveal to him all his secrets, the secrets of Torah and the secrets of worldly things. A very intimate relationship, but different from the one we saw on Wednesday. Now, this time of year, I mentioned this before, between Passover and Shavuot is called Sfirat HaOmer, and it's a time of semi-mourning, why there are no weddings, etc., because of the text we're going to read now, because of what happened to Rabbi Akiva's students. Now, the interesting question that's going to relate to Rabbi Akiva and his students, they're asking, well, let's see. Suppose you didn't have children, or they died, or God forbid, or something happened to them. Would your grandchildren count as children? Okay? Not everybody is privileged to have grandchildren, but suppose you only had grandchildren left. Would that be okay? Okay? So that's an interesting question. It's Talmudic thinking. Now, it doesn't matter. You could have two. You could have grandchildren. Keep going. You should never abstain from it. Keep going, right? Rabbi Yeshua said, and here's the text, if a person married a wife in his youth, nasa adam ishto b'yalduto, something happened, doesn't matter. Marry again in old age, isa isha b'ziknuto. Keep going. Doesn't matter. You're 75, if you're 80, don't give up. Keep going. This is a great text you'll see for. I was very happy that many of the retired people or older people come to the lectures, people who have come to take courses in Jewish studies. Dorothy Becker was here the first night, and she talked about starting her career in Jewish studies when she was older and then becoming the program director. And I had, as I mentioned, Wednesday night, I talked to Timmy at the Prusians, and she talked about this wonderful experience of having adult women coming together to learn bat mitzvah. This text is for all of us, people who are eligible for the AARP, including me. I am also. You keep going. What about if suppose he had children in his youth, still keep going. He should still try to have them in his old age. And it gives the proof text. In the morning sow your seed, and in the evening don't be idle, don't withhold. Why? Because you really can't know. You really can't know which will succeed, or whether both are equally good. And of course with children, who knows? We never know. We never know what life will bring. Now, this is the context for Rabbi Akiva. So this is about procreation. And we've been talking about the son, daughter, parent-child relationship and its relation to the teacher-student. Now, Rabbi Akiva, our main focus tonight, had another interpretation of this verse. And what did he say? He said, Lamad Torah b'yalduto, a person who learned Torah in their youth, he said, okay, I learned mitzvah, I had my degree in Jewish studies, I learned, fine, I'm done. No, Yilmod Torah b'ziknuto, continue to learn in his old age. There's no retirement. You can't retire. No such thing. You can't retire from learning. You have to keep going. And even, what about him who had great students in his youth? Suppose you had a great career as a teacher. He had disciples in his youth. He should have them in his old age too. You can't retire. You have to keep teaching. You have to keep going. As it says, and he used that verse. Now, that's a great principle. It's very hard to do, especially in the university where you're 62, 63. What's the retirement age now? You're out. You're finished. No, there isn't any? Okay, so we can all fulfill this. They say, how did he really exemplify this principle? Now, here's the key text. 12,000 zugim talmidim hayu lo l'Rabbi Akiva. He had, how many people? At his peak, he had 12,000 pairs of students. He had 24,000 students. How many students are at the University of Washington here on the campus? Okay, so he had like 2/3 of the student body. Were his massive number of students. And again, we're talking about this as a literary text, not necessarily what are the historical issues here. And they extended from Gvat to Antiparas, which is an area of Judea. And what happened to them? Kulan metu beperek achad. All of them died in one period. Why? Mipnei shelo nahagu kavod ze leze, because they didn't treat each other with respect. And the world was left barren until what happened? Here's a man, again, now what this is referring to, you know, some people say this was the time of the hundreds of thousands of deaths in the Bar Kokhba Wars. Perhaps they were killed in that. He was a supporter. The Talmud says no. The deeper reason, even if that was true, there was a deeper reason why it happened. They didn't treat each other with respect. And what did he do after? Can you imagine, like, losing, God forbid, two-thirds of the university in some disaster? How do you recover from that? We were talking about that issue on Wednesday, too. Until he came to our rabbis in the south, he came to the other part of the country that was not as devastated as the area of Judea, and he taught them. And who did he teach? These sages. He gives the names Rebbe Meir, Rebbe Yehuda, etc. And they were the ones who upheld the study of Torah. And when did all of these 12,000 pairs of disciples die? At this period that we're in right now in the Jewish calendar, between Passover and Shavuot. And what did they die from? It was an ugly death, askara, which apparently is some kind of croup or throat infection, choking, etc. So this is a very powerful and famous story. And it's one of the reasons why there are no weddings in this period. It's a period of semi-mourning, etc. So what's the question? What's the question here? Last time we talked about Rabbi Akiva is the one who's associated with love your fellow as yourself is the great principle of the Torah, right? Remember? And the Song of Songs is the Holy of Holies, the love between God and Israel. And all of the love story with his wife. So the question is, how could somebody, that was his essence of his teaching, have students who didn't carry it on, who died because of lack of respect for each other? Who's responsible? Who's responsible for it? This is a question, you know, we ask all the time. To what extent are you responsible for the way your students follow or don't follow your teachings? There's a lot of a difficult thing to understand here. Now you see it says also that there are 12,000 pairs. There's a few other sources for this, but it implicates to us there's something wrong in the way they're related as pairs, in their chavruta partners. What's a chavruta, by the way? I should define that term. Chavruta means friendship, study partner. And I have as my graphics today on my cover sheet, I have pictures of chavruta learning, okay? You see? And Torah was never, you know, first of all, they didn't really have books, a lot of books in the ancient world. And there's a whole bias against learning by yourself. You should always learn in a group. Now, this pairing of people, this is the classical Beit Midrash or house of study. See these people over a text, one-on-one, trying to puzzle out the Talmud, is historically, it's a very entrenched method. It's used in most of the great yeshivot, and it's a wonderful way of learning. This is face-to-face. And here, see these at the bottom? This is two men. You can see this is an older, it didn't come out so well. This looks from about 1950s. Two men sitting together in chavruta, learning. But now it's 2004, so of course I had to update it. In this one, the man and the woman is from Pardes, the Pardes Institute, which is a wonderful place to learn. And of course, I have to have women learning together too. And this is from the place Nishmat, which I have learned. I've studied there, where women learn on a very high level together, chavruta learning. And there's another interesting aspect to the idea of pairs, because you see that in a lot of the Jewish sources, everything goes through debate and argument of pairs. You always think of like Hillel and Shammai, right, in their debates. Or we talked in the first lecture about the debate between Rebbe Eliezer and the sages. Or one who's very interesting pair, Rebbe Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Or Rav and Shmuel, or Abai and Rav. The whole Talmud is made up of the debates of pairs. There's a fascinating story that I don't have time to go into, but I want to allude to it, and it's on the next page. Here's a famous pair, two great sages in the Talmud. Chavruta, friendship, is a very complicated relation. We talked about nursing and its complexities. Now let's talk about friendship. We all have the experience of friendship. You can see on the chart, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are another 100 years after Rabbi Akiva, but again, two of the greatest sages. Just to summarize, Reish Lakish was an interesting character. He was learned, and apparently he became a gladiator or a robber or something, and he came back to learning through the influence of Rabbi Yochanan. There's a very interesting story. He sees him in the river, and they exchange words, and he says, come and learn, give your strength to Torah, and he becomes a great, great, great scholar, and the Talmid Haver, the learning partner student of the great sage Rabbi Yochanan. And one time they're having a debate. And remember, a week ago there was a big trouble about the debate with Rabbi Eliezer and the sages about the ritual purity of the oven, and he got excommunicated. So, watch out. There's this dispute about weapons, sword, knife, dagger, spear. At what point do they become ritually unclean? When they're finished? Or at what stage? So Rabbi Yochanan says when they're tempered in the furnace, and Reish Lakish says no, after they've been in the water. And Rabbi Yochanan says to him, aha, a robber understands his trade. You know, you dealt with that. You were the gladiator. You dealt with those weapons, so you know. You're the expert. This was very hurtful to Reish Lakish. And he says, and what? So what have you benefited me from? There I was called a robber. As a robber, I was called the master. I was the master of gladiators or the master of thieves. I don't know, maybe Marty, you can clarify historically. Was he a gladiator? Was he a robber? Different versions, yeah. And here I'm called master, so what's the difference? You know, what have you done for me? I've given my life to you. Well, I brought you under the wings of the Shekhinah. I brought you to God, Rabbi Yochanan says. But Rabbi Yochanan was deeply hurt. Reish Lakish fell ill from this terrible debate between them, and Reish Lakish died. And Rabbi Yochanan was plunged into grief. Now, the last paragraph is fascinating. The Rebbe says, how are we going to ease the mind of Rabbi Yochanan? We'll send him Rabbi Elazar because he's very subtle in his thinking. So Rabbi Elazar goes to him, and every time Rabbi Yochanan says something, he says, I have a baraita, I have a source which supports you. Very disappointing. Rabbi Yochanan says, are you like the son of Lakish? Reish Lakish is an acronym for Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, the son of Lakish. When I stated a law, he would raise 24 objections to argue with me, and I gave 24 answers, and then we had this fuller comprehension, and you say, here's something to support you. I know, don't I know my dicta are right? So he's rending his garments, and he's weeping, and he says, where are you, the son of Lakish? Where are you? Very, very poignant story. And he cried until his mind was turned, and the rabbis prayed for him, and he died. So here we see in the Chavruta the delicacy of that. We had the great image of the nursing mother, which was so beautiful last time. This is more complicated. An intimacy, a reciprocity, that's much more tension-filled. On the one hand, he says, but very, very productive. I have to tell you a story. This is from 2,000 years ago, but a contemporary story. In the book that I edited with Jeff Sachs, Wisdom from All My Teachers, we have an essay by Norman Lamb. Now, Norman Lamb was the president of Yeshiva University, and he studied with Rav Soloveitchik, one of the great Orthodox thinkers and philosophers of our time. Many of the modern Orthodox rabbis were students of Rav Soloveitchik. So he tells a story about going to class, and everybody, and I hear this from everybody who studied with Rav Soloveitchik, they were nervous wrecks to study Talmud with Rav Soloveitchik because he was brilliant and very demanding. He came from the brisk tradition. Although in his public lectures, he also talked about the teacher as the nursing mother. But for his students, his close students, very demanding. So he said, we would come to class ready for battle, and we shriveled up. And I heard the story, you know, a Gemara, it's a very big book. They're like this, the Talmud. And they would hide. And they would hide behind the book because they were afraid to engage in this intellectual combat. And they would hope that he wouldn't see them and call on them. So one time he caught Rabbi Norman Lamb. And he'd been developing a thesis, and he says, Lamb, what does the Tosafos say? Tosafos is a commentary on the Talmud, and so it's the complicated dialectic. And Lamb says, I was very intimidated, so I repeated what he had said the day before. And I thought, he's gonna like that. And what do you think happened? He erupted like a volcano and said, I know what I'm saying. I don't need you to tell me. What do you think? And he said that was his greatness as a teacher. He didn't want the student to parrot. He wanted them to learn his method, but to reach their own conclusions. And loved the student who challenged him. Like, this was the living example of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. And he said, as a matter of fact, he got so angry with me, he said, they can sell you the Brooklyn Bridge. And he said to him, the problem with you is, you leave your evil inclination at the door. You know, there's this idea of the good inclination, the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara in Judaism. And what is it? You're born with the Yetzer Hara, you get the Yetzer Tov when you're bar mitzvah, or bat mitzvah. You hope you get it. Anyway, this was like, Yetzer Hara has a head start, so it's a little harder to. So he says, you check your evil inclination at the outside, and you come in only with your good inclination. Next time, bring your evil inclination in with you, and leave the good one at the door. And this is a great story because I think Rav Soloveitchik was really the living modern example, inheritor of this great tradition of Talmudic learning in our time. And it's one of those living face-to-face stories that embodies this whole dialectic. So he talked about his passion was for the process of learning, not so much the final result, the final knowledge, although that was important. And that's what's the essence of the Chavruta learning. Now, who was the first Chavruta? I mean, here's Rabbi Yochanan, here's Rav Soloveitchik. If I asked you, who do you think, if you think about the Bible, who would you think would be, you see that relationship anywhere? Who is the first Chavruta, the first learning partners? You think? I think I'm going to surprise you with the answer. It's really God and Moses, God and Moshe. So you remember Moses goes up and he gets the Ten Commandments, and he's coming down. So Moses comes down, and it says in the text, he gave to Moses, when he'd made an end of speaking with him, the 2 tablets of testimony, Kekalato ledaber ito. Now, what do the rabbis say? Well, it seems like, okay, he wrote the tablets, he gave it to him. No, it's Chavruta. He says, ledaber ito, when he finished speaking with him, it teaches us that Moses heard mipi hagvura, from the mouth, there's your mouth, from the mouth of the mighty one, ve'chozrin ve'shonin et ha'halacha shnechem yachad. They repeated and studied the law, the 2 of them together. So it was the questioning, as you pointed out, but when it was given, what they're saying is, they were already in Chavruta, they were already like these study partners. They were repeating and looking, and like we're trying to do, repeating it, looking at it, studying together. Mishnah, Shonim, to learn to teach. So that's the first Chavruta in a way, and that's a very important source, because that's part of the answer of what is the relationship of teacher-student to friend to friend? How are these 2 things interacting? Now let's try to go into that a little more. Now we're looking at 2 aspects. What are we looking at the whole time? We're looking at conflict. We're looking at conflict in learning as opposed to the beautiful nursing, which we saw also was not so simple because there's this, who's controlling it, the mother or the child. Rabbi Yirmiyah said in Rabbi Eliezer's name, when 2 scholars sharpen each other, mechadedim ze leze b'halacha, God gives them success. Sharpening means like, we have a debate, and like with Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, he sharpened me. It's like a knife, right? You have to like put them against each other. So it's not all just this nice nursing and you agree with me and we're having a nice conversation, but we have to have that, okay? And then there are 3 in the name of Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish talks also about the other part. When 2 scholars are amiable, hanochim ze leze, to each other, God makshiv lahem, he listens. God listens in, okay? Because it says, and here's the proof text, Az nidabru yirei Hashem, v'chule, etc., ve'ein dibur el anachat. And then it brings a proof text, they that nidbaru were heard each other or feared God, spoke together, and God listened. Now this is very interesting. I have to explain a little bit in Hebrew grammar. Nidbaru is passive voice, okay? So it says, those who were heard by each other, God listens. Now, I found a great commentary on this by Aaron Kahn, who said, why is it using the passive voice? Because, how many friends do you have that really want to hear you? You know the famous thing like, that's enough of me talking about me. Why don't you talk about me for a while, you know? It's like, you're talking and they're listening, but they're kind of just waiting to say what they have to say. To listen, we talked about this the other night. The meaning of the word Kabbalah is to receive, and it's harder to receive than to give, and it really is. To receive, to listen, to be it takes much more gvura, it takes much more strength in a way than to give, than to speak. You're doing a lot harder work than I am right now. No, it's really true. I was very tired, I'm having a great time, and then I get up here and I have all this energy and I can move around, and you have to sit there, like we said, in these seats, and you have to really concentrate. It's very hard to listen. Very, very hard. So to really listen to a person, to be heard, to allow a person to be heard is a very powerful thing. Like we say in Israel, they say, stop talking while I'm interrupting you. That's kind of how we have discourse there. So what he says here is he says that to really hear and listen to a person, to allow oneself to be corrected, to leave your framework, to do what you're doing now, it's very hard. But if you can do that, if you're really willing to listen, then what will happen? God will listen to you. And if you're not, God will not listen to you. This is a beautiful interpretation. This is kind of the relationship of teacher, student, 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 and the relation of God to the whole process. Let me go over that. In other words, he says, Rav Aaron Kahn says, this text is saying, if you're not willing to let another be heard and hear another, God is not willing to listen to you. If you're willing to listen and you open yourself, then God listens to you. It's what you call midah keneged midah. Okay? God says, if you're not willing to listen, why should I listen? Right? So part of the chavruta, what's creating between the two people, is also a relationship above, that God is entering. So it's not just, here's God to human being, and then human being to human being. It's a triangle, love triangle. Everything interacting. So that's, now, I want to do two more sources, and this is Reish Lakish said this, and remember what happened to Reish Lakish. That's why it's so important, because he's saying all these beautiful things about chavruta, and he had this tragic end to his with Rabbi Yochanan. He says when two scholars form an assembly, it's kind of hard to translate. There's a madgilim ze leze. God loves them. That's another level. When they're intimate, then God loves them. When they listen, God listens. When they're intimate, God loves them. And when they pay heed to each other, God listens. Okay. Now, it's not a simple thing, as we said. Friendship isn't a simple thing. I just want to stop here, and one of my learning partners in Jerusalem actually gave me this book on friendship right before I left. And it has just a few beautiful lines about what friendship is, and I'm going to use this to jump into Rav Hutner, who's going to explain how is it that even though you can have enmity and conflict, you can have friendship and love come out of that. Okay? And all of us who have friends know that it's wonderful, but it's not easy. Here's Ned Rorem, the American composer. He said, sooner or later, you've heard all about your best friends. You've heard about all your best friends have to say, right? Then comes the tolerance of real love. It's true, right? Your really good friends, you know all their stories. You've heard them several times. Then comes the tolerance of love. Friendship and love have a lot of emotional complexities. Then there's one by Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde, of course, is the great Irish writer who has wonderful epigrams. Sensational. Friendship is far more tragic than love. It lasts longer. That's so Oscar Wilde. I love Oscar Wilde. I'm teaching him this semester. He said he always brings his diary when he travels because one should have something sensational to read on the train. You know that line of Oscar Wilde. It's great. That's the importance of being earnest is his. But it's a very interesting point about the eros of friendship. Now, there's another one, I think, very related. To find a friend, one must close one eye. To keep him, two. This is different from the mother, child, the nurse, because the mother loves the child no matter what, right? The mother and the child don't have that, but with your friends, it's a little different. Friendship says Samuel Butler, the great English novelist, is like money. Why? It's easier made than kept. It's true. And the last one, I think, illuminates another aspect of this friendship relationship we're looking at. Each friend, this is a beautiful one, each friend represents a world in us, a world possibly not born until they arrive. And it is only by this meeting that a new world is born. That's Aeneas Nin, the French writer. That's very beautiful because a world is created with a friend. But what about all these conflicts we were looking at? And the end that came to Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Now, and the Moses-God relationship. It's very interesting. Remember that when Moses comes down and he sees the golden calf, he breaks the tablets. He's so angry. And then he goes up again and he has to have the second version, have them redone again, version 2 of the software there. But it's interesting because in the commentary in the Talmud, it says, Yashar Koach, good that you broke them. It was a good thing that you broke them. And when Moses died, it said many of the laws were forgotten and they had to reconstruct them through argument. Now, the Rav Hutner, who I mentioned last time, who was one of the great also thinkers and Talmudic scholars of our time, said, this is teaching you something very important about Chavruta relationship. Let me just build up this piece. Sure, I mean, it's obvious. If you argue with someone, you know, it expands your mind. Like Rabbi Yochanan says, don't bring me somebody who agrees with me. Rabbi Soloveitchik says, don't agree with me. Argue with me. I want to hear another argument. And then God hears, but that expands the Torah. It expands my knowledge. Blake said, without contraries, there's no progression. You have to have that. So, of course, it makes, the Torah isn't this book, it's dictated to Moses, and it's written, and it's frozen. It's in flux. It's argued about, and it's growing that way. So, okay, we can understand that. That's not such a great insight. But what about this negative part of the arguing? And I mentioned this line on the other night. The Talmud says, even when a parent and child are arguing over the Torah and become enemies, they don't move from there until they become friends. Okay. By the way, this reminds me, you know Rav Adin Steinsaltz? He's a great Israeli contemporary scholar, writer, and he translated the Talmud from Aramaic into Hebrew. He's in the process, which is a great, great work. And I once heard him give a lecture about Jewish learning, and he said, you know how Jews learn? They pick up the book and they kiss it, because it's holy, open it up and pound on it with their study partner and argue, and then they close it and kiss it again, which is true. You know, you kiss the book, you open it, you start arguing. If you walk down the street in Israel or near a yeshiva, you think there's a football game going on in there. It's not like the silent library, the silent reading of text. Now that women are learning, it's interesting. I'm very interested in whether women learning Talmud have this same milchemta, the war of Torah. Not quite. It's a little bit different. It has to remain to be seen what develops. So people are arguing, and it's passionate, and it's life and death, and you can really, Rabbi Yochanan ben Lakish, enemies. They didn't wind up at the end with the love, except they were mourning each other. They were mourning each other. So what does that mean? How do you get from that enmity to love? So he wants to say that this connection between the partners, despite it's giving you a promise. Despite the enmity at the beginning, the love will come. Why? And he has a very interesting principle about love in general. Let's see if you agree with this. Because all love, he says, reaches its summit at the point when the two sides have a partnership in creating. Think about it. Just think about it in your own life. It doesn't have to be learning. Again, I'm mentioning the story I heard about the older women here in Seattle coming together to form a group to learn for their bar mitzvah together, which is actually, it said learn in your old age. And they were telling me, Timmy was telling me the love that was created and the bonds and the support. Why did that happen? And why doesn't that happen if somebody just gives you a lecture? Because they're creating their partners together. So he says here, even two sides that have been goring each other in halakha, there's the whole thing about, the ox that gores, and they're really fighting. They're partners because new ideas are being created, and therefore out of the war is going to come love. Why did it happen with Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish? They weren't creating together at that point. I don't know. That it didn't happen there. But in general, you don't move until you become friends, because out of the conflict, you're creating a new idea together. So it's a much deeper relationship. That's what the study relationship is. And as I was, again, going over this, I thought, I think this is a great test of all learning. I think university learning, all learning should be that. That, in other words, I think what they're saying here, what's the test of a true learning? Did you acquire a friend? If the students don't acquire a friend, what does that say about the teacher? The teacher's injured. I'm injured, I'm responsible. So if the students, and this, again, what we're all doing is we're trying to understand this question. Rabbi Akiva loved, his students didn't react with respect to each other. There was something wrong in their chavruta. How could that happen? So the teacher ascends and descends according to the students and what the relationships between the students is. It isn't just something for the student union or the dorms. It's a different way of looking. I think it applies to all knowledge. In that sense, aseh lecha rav, make yourself a teacher. The student makes the teacher. In a different way than we saw the first night with Rabbi Eliezer, we didn't have anybody to teach at the end. If the students don't have that relationship, the teacher is injured, and the teacher gets his or her identity from the relations between the students. It's a whole different way of looking at it. Their relationship to each other creates the teacher. Now I want to go back in the last part here with Moses and God, because that's the paradigm, right? Moses is the great teacher of Israel, and that was the original chavruta, and I'm going to talk about Rev Soloveitchik. We're going back to the burning bush now, okay? And we're going back to Exodus. There's the moment where Moses, after he breaks the tablets, he goes back up, and he wants to get God to forgive the people. And he gets him to do it, and he sees that it's a great moment of mercy and rachamim. And so he says to God, show me your glory. Yomer harinina et kvodecha. Please show me your glory. And it says, that Moses and God, speaking of your introduction, had a face-to-face relationship. That's the real teacher-student. But of course, in other places, it said they really didn't, because God says to him, I'll make all my goodness pass before you, but you can't see my face. And this connects to what I talked about in the second lecture, the face-to-face. You can't. Lo tuchal lirot et panai, ki lo yoreni adam v'chai. Nobody can see my face and live. So I'll put you in this rock, I'll cover you with my hand, I'll pass by, and you'll see my back, but you can't see my face. And then what happens is he's up there another 40 days, 40 nights, he gets the tablets, he comes down again, and the text I was talking about, Wednesday, his face is shining. And there's this whole question, where did that shining face come from? One commentary says when God put his hand on his face, it came from there. Very beautiful ideas. And the people are afraid to come near him because he's got this radiance of his face, and he has to put a veil on his face. We talked about that in the previous lectures. Now, how does this relate to my theme of the evening? Now I'm going to give you a really very powerful interpretation of Rav Soloveitchik that I think sums it up. He says this whole story about the concealing of the face is really about the nature of knowledge and ethics and how we know and how we teach and learn. And, of course, the Talmud has interpretation of this text. And he cites it. It's on the next page. And here's Moses and God in this intimate teaching, receiving relationship that's a model for everything. And we go back, actually, to what you mentioned, the burning bush. You're right, absolutely right. And the context is, Rabbi Yochanan says, Moses asked God for 3 things, and they were granted to him. And I'll just sum up that first paragraph. And he said, show me your ways. What was he asking for? when he says, show me your ways, the Talmud says what he was really asking for was a kind of knowledge. He was asking the great teacher there, tell me, why do the righteous suffer? This, of course, is the question we all want to know, especially these days, but all the time. Why do the righteous suffer? Why is there evil? Why is there suffering in the world? Now, this Rabbi Yochanan said, God gives him this answer, it gives an answer, but there's a debate about that. As I said, everything is debate. And I'll skip down to the third paragraph. When God is saying, you can't see my face, he's saying to Moses, when I wanted, Ksharatziti lo ratzita, you didn't want. Now you want, I don't want. Okay, let me just clarify that. It's relating the text of the burning bush. What happens at the burning bush? Moses comes, called to the burning bush, and he turns his face aside because he was afraid to see. Now, the Talmud says, God is saying, I was giving you a chance. This is Rav Soloveitchik's interpretation, too, of this. When I wanted to show you my face, meaning I want to explain everything to you, I was willing to give you absolute knowledge. Why do the righteous suffer? Why is there evil in the world? The deepest secrets that we all want to find, you hid your face. As it says here in the Talmud. But now you want, now here it's after the golden calf, and you say, now show me your face. I don't want to anymore. Now that sounds kind of childish, right? You say, what's going on here? So we have to go deeper. So there's a debate here. The other sage says, Moses, when he hid his face at the burning bush, that's when he got this reward of it being bright. It was right that he hid it. It wasn't wrong. He didn't get punished for it. It wasn't wrong. It was right because he was so humble. So it's very confusing because we have a debate. Did he do the right thing or didn't he do the right thing? Was he right to hide his face and therefore he was humble and he got the shining face? Or was he wrong because God says, no, I'm not doing it anymore. Your time is up. You missed your chance. Now, Rav Soloveitchik in his brilliance has a very penetrating analysis of this that I think bears upon everything I've said here. He says that offer, I'll give you absolute truth at the burning bush where Moses, and I'll explain to you the evil of the world. Why did Moses refuse? This was the great chance for Moses to know. So why would he choose to remain in the darkness of finite understanding? He was afraid to become an all-knower. Why? He says, because if Moses were to know everything in the absolute sense, God's knowledge, because you're right, humans can't have it, he would lose his ability to feel compassion and love for his fellow creatures. Why would that happen? Because, and now think about it, this is my metaphor for it. You know when I'm flying, you take a trip and you go to the airport and it's such a mess there and the security and you're rushing and the tickets and you get up in the air and everything is laid out for you and it's so beautiful. Everything is patterned and the world is beautiful, right? It's, the little farms and you're out of the whole messy jumble and chaos of everyday relation. So the absolute knowledge, in a sense, you would see the world. This is my analogy to explain him. He says he would have understood from that huge perspective, because a lot of times when people want to comfort you, when, God forbid, you're suffering, they say, well, it's part of a larger pattern, and we don't really understand, and God has his purposes. I don't mean to put that down, but it's not really comforting, is it? You're not interested in that. When you're in pain and you're suffering, you're not interested in the grand picture. You just know that you're in pain. As it says also in this, don't comfort a person when their dead is lying before them. Don't come to them in the book of Job. Remember, the comforters come to Job. You don't understand. There's a purpose. And Job is furious. And that's when Job gets angry and cries out no and starts to fight. And at the end of the book of Job, God says to the comforters, you didn't speak rightly about me as Job did. Don't come with those answers. Now, Rav Soloveitchik is saying, but if he had the God's answers, not the human, it's all apart, but he really saw the pattern. Not just, there is, we don't know. He saw it. What would happen? Everything that was negative, and he saw it was ultimately for the good, including death and poverty and suffering and loneliness, all these awful things that we're witnessing in these days. He couldn't, you may disagree with this, he couldn't have felt compassion or protested against God. Loving kindness comes to humanity at a heavy price, says Rav Soloveitchik, lack of knowing. And he, in other words, he knew that. Why did he sacrifice that great human desire to know God ultimately and know the all for the sake of the love of his fellows? In other words, he was able that way to suffer and do good for them. Now what happens? The whole story of the Bible, Moses suffers terribly. People are terrible. These rebellions and fighting and take us back to Egypt and, the golden calf, and he doesn't even make it to the promised land. But he's the great leader because you can't do that unless if you're so above it, if you know the all, and you see the pattern, you can't have chesed, you can't have true compassion and fellow feeling. That's Rav Soloveitchik's argument. That's when God said, when I wanted, you didn't want, you refused it. Now you want, and I don't want. Meaning, Rav Soloveitchik says, God is reminding him, you made that choice way back. You made that choice. You can't have absolute knowledge and human kindness at the same time. You sacrificed that because you wanted to do that for your people. Remember, Moses says, if you're going to wipe them out, wipe me out of your book. I'm going to go too. But the Talmud here says he got the shining face from that. Remember, he hid his face, he got the shining face, he comes down with the shining face. It was a great act of love. It was a great act of sacrifice. And that was his reward. So he, in a sense, Rav Soloveitchik calls this Akedat Moshe, he bound his intellect. And actually in that text where God says, I'll put you in the cleft of the rock, and he showed his backside, the rabbi says he showed him the kesher, the knot of his tefillin, the binding of the mind. Now, for a great philosopher and Talmudist, and we talked about Rav Soloveitchik saying, I don't want to know what I think, use your head, bring in your evil inclination at the door, use your mind. In that context, it's even a stronger statement. And I think it has to do, in conclusion, about what do we say about the university? I put this question to you about relating everything I said. Is it true? In the university, we're searching for knowledge. We seek the knowledge of all things. Can it be a place of knowledge and compassion? Can those two things go together? Can you take this model of chavruta and learning and love and combine them together? Can you have aseh lecha rav uknei lecha chaver? Can you have that kindness and love? If some of you are here from the campus and you've studied postmodern thought, we're always talking about the hermeneutics of suspicion and the other, and it's a very negative thing, but can it become a shining face? So the question of what happened to Rabbi Akiva's students, if I had more time, we could do another chavruta, but I see the time is running out. Maybe we'll do in the question period. Why couldn't he pass? Why didn't they act with love towards each other? What got stuck in that process of the creation of knowledge and the chesed and the love? Maybe it was because there were 24,000 as opposed to the intimate. And what happens when it gets big like that? You can't have the one-on-one. I don't know. I leave it open. You come up with great ideas, so maybe someone will have another commentary. I want to end. This is really the ending. Lectures always do this. I'm ending, and they don't end. But we saw what happened to poor Rabbi Sheshet from Rav Huna's long lecture, so I better end before I just, go against these texts. It's with a prayer. It's okay. Like I said, I think it's the first night I said, the question of should there be prayer in public schools, as long as there are math tests, there will always be prayer in public schools. I'm not giving you a test, but it's a prayer from the Talmud, and I want it to sum up my whole 3 lectures and my time in Seattle. And in the Tractate of Brachot, it says, Rabbi Nehunya bar Hakana used to say a prayer as he would enter the Beit Midrash, the place of study. This is a good question. Why is it so dangerous you have to say a prayer? You say a prayer if you're going on a plane, but he would say a short prayer. And they said, well, what did he say? And he said, when I enter, I'll say it in English and then Hebrew because there's a very interesting formulation. He said, I pray that no offense should occur through me, and when I leave, I express thanks for my lot. In Hebrew, it's Rabbi Nehunya ben Hakana haya mitpalel b'knisato leveit hamidrash. וביציאתו תפילה קצרה, אמרו לו, מה מקום לתפילה זו? אמר להם, בכניסתי, when I enter, אני מתפלל, I pray, שלא יארע דבר תקלה. דבר תקלה means, like if you Takala is like, could somebody help me here? A stumbling, a fault, a takala in your refrigerator, a takala baderech, a tank breaks, it's a takala, right? A what? No, not a nuisance. It's like a mechanical failure or a failure, a glitch, stronger than a glitch, a breakdown, a kishalon, a breakdown. Al yadi, it shouldn't have caused any breakdowns, any failures, any errors. Uviyatziati, and when he left, ani noten hoda al helki. I give praise, thanks for my portion that I was able to be in the Beit Midrash and be a student. And I want to give thanks that I was able to come here and learn and study with you, and that this is my portion, and that Mrs. Stroum also made this possible. And I want to thank you again as part of my prayer. Thank you for enabling me to come and have this as my portion in Seattle and in life. I give that same thanks and that same prayer. And I hope I didn't, when I taught that no takalot, that I didn't get things wrong, although Talmud says nobody succeeds in Torah unless they first stumble in it. And I give a lot of thanks. Now, the last thing is, though, it's not simple, because you know from being here that there's always another side of this. You could repunctuate that differently, because the Gemara says, what was this prayer? What should a person say? And it says there that you should say to God, may it be your will that no takala occurs through me, and I don't fail in deciding the law. V'yismachu bi chaverai. This is related to our theme. And my colleagues should rejoice in me. That not only should I not fail, but my colleagues should rejoice in me. However, Rashi, the commentator, reads that differently. He punctuates that I shouldn't fail and my colleagues should rejoice in my failures. It's the opposite. Remember, Monday I said, you say, maybe, because there's no punctuation, and my colleagues shouldn't rejoice in my failures. This relates to the chavruta. And that I don't say what is impure is pure, and vice versa. Ve'yikshalu chaverai b'davar halacha ve'esmach behem. And that my colleagues should also not fail in their learning and their decisions, and I should be happy with them. Rashi says, put the comma in a different place. Then my colleagues should not fail, and I should be happy in their failures. I should rejoice in their failures. So you can read it both ways. I have the prayer for both of those things. I had a wonderful time. I rejoiced in you. I hope you rejoice in me. And again, I thank you for my lots in giving these wonderful lectures and for the 3 nights of coming. And we have a few minutes if you want to ask further questions.
Well, first of all, thank you for wonderful lectures.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank
You gave us model after model of failure.
Mm-hmm.
Rabbi Eliezer is excommunicated by his students. Rabbi Akiva says, I can't teach you. Today, Rabbi Yochanan and Lakish say they end up dying, and Rabbi Akiva's 24,000 students die. It's failure after failure.
I didn't make you so happy after all.
Is this a very, very delicate and difficult relationship that you're talking about?
Yes.
And is it one that the Gemara is trying to tell us is bounded? That is, you have to have conflict in it, and you have to have love in it, but those two are very bounded. There are rules for them. And what we may learn from Rabbi Akiva's students is that it doesn't take much to go over those rules. And that even in the university, too, we have to know how far to go with our students and how far students can go with each other, both in their conflict and in their support of each other.
I love the comment about failure, because I don't think we're afraid of failure. This whole thing actually beautifully connects to the prayer, which I haven't really studied in depth. Because I was preparing, I didn't want to throw too much at you. I threw enough at you as it was. But I'd like to go back and study that, because he said, why would a person entering say, and I shouldn't fail, and they shouldn't rejoice in me? Also, the obverse, Moshe, in a sense, Moses was a failure, didn't he? He didn't make it. He didn't make it into the promised land. There's a wonderful essay by Arthur Cohen called The Excellence of Failure. And it's all about all the failures in Jewish tradition and how we're not afraid of it. He failed, he didn't make it. I mentioned the ever-dying people. And that line, nobody can succeed in the words of Torah, "El im ken hu nikshal bahem," unless he fails in them first. This idea, I think, of failure and success, maybe we're very American in our notions of what's failure and success. And boy, wouldn't that be a great learning for a student? Students are terrified to fail. There's no room for failure in the university. You get your 75 and you're in panic. Failure is essential to learning. All these things about the Fortune 500 and they interview the executive. How do you account for your success? I wasn't afraid to fail. I learned from my failures. So maybe we need a pedagogy of failure. Pedagogy of the oppressed, Paulo Freire. Maybe I should write a book, The Pedagogy of Failure. Wouldn't that be comforting? Maybe that's because there's no learning without failure. You're afraid to fail? Anybody here who's in business, who succeeded, I'm sure you had plenty of failures. So the fact that they failed doesn't bother me, and maybe we have to redefine it. If we're still talking about them 2,000 years later, they probably did pretty well. But because they confronted failure and overcame it, when you teach the Bible, and there's this whole debate, should you teach, in religious schools, that everybody was perfect, or should you show all the failures? It depends on the age. But if you think of yourself, what have you really learned from in your life? Your successes or your failures? And maybe then failure isn't failure. Maybe it's something else. Moshe didn't make it, but we have his Torah.